Rats are one of those animals that many people have strong feelings about. Either they hate them or they love them, and they're often the main concern when talking about composting systems. Personally, I think they're amazing animals, and I'm quite content having them in and around my compost piles. And I'd actually rather they build their nests in the compost rather than nesting in the gardens or in the surrounding landscape. There are very common guidelines to not add cooked foods, meats, and oils or other similar materials to the compost, as they will attract rats. I've found that rats will nest in compost piles even if these potential food sources are avoided, so I take more of an everything goes type of approach to the compost systems that I manage, especially as they are located far away from any houses or other buildings. So I've become quite tolerant to having rats around, except for when they pass over all of the good things to eat that we put in the compost piles and instead eat the vegetables straight from my gardens. The first time that I realized that rats were eating vegetables in the gardens was a number of years ago when I felt that the crop of peas was not as abundant as I had anticipated it would be. It seemed that someone else was helping themselves to the pods. Then one day I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye and saw a rat climbing down the pea vines and hiding underneath the other plants. A few minutes later it came out again, climbed up the pea plants, bit off a full pod of peas which it kept in its mouth as it climbed down and ran under the plants again. A process that had repeated several times before I finally chased it away. I figured it had taken the pods back to its nest somewhere for storage, but a while later I found a patch of open pods and the remains of chewed peas underneath the vegetable plants nearby. A rat had been removing the peas to eat in a more secure location before going back for more. I haven't noticed this happening to the same extent since then, but I could be regularly losing peas without noticing it. But last year I grew a long line of peas in the scrap ground between two polytunnels with the purpose of saving seeds for growing pea shoots. Because these plants were out of the way and I wasn't checking them regularly, I didn't find out until too late that most of the pods had been taken, and I found the remains of many pods under the plants that had been eaten by rats. But fresh peas aren't the only seeds that I've discovered rats eating. A few years ago, I was growing microgreens in one of my polytunnels, which involves a dense sowing of seeds on the surface of the soil, and after a few successful batches, I noticed a lot of damage to the patch of sunflower seeds. At first, I thought it was mice, but using a wildlife camera, I discovered that rats were also loving the partially sprouted seeds, gathering them up to take them back to their nest. They did so much damage to the crop that I decided to give up growing microgreens this way until I could get rid of the rats. So rats definitely like to eat seeds, which is not surprising as they're quite nutritious, and I have wondered if they're responsible for the failed germination of some batches of seeds that I've sown in the past. And now I suspect that they've been rats enjoying the treats that I buried in a straight line for them. But it isn't just the seeds that the rats seem to enjoy in my gardens. I was quite surprised to find the developing beetroot being chewed by something while they were still in the ground. And seeing a rat scurrying into the beetroot patch and examining the shape of the bite marks left in the root, I realized it was definitely rats enjoying these vegetables. An occasional nibble here and there is tolerable, but I've had a few batches that had a lot of damage, and it seems that the closed canopy of the leaves provides an ideal hiding place for the rats, who can happily munch away at one beetroot after another for weeks. And unless I do regular checks, they can cause significant damage to most of the beetroots in the bed before I notice anything, as the plants seem to be able to continue to grow reasonably well with a lot of root chewed away. And they've also sampled the base of the chard plants, which are close relatives to the beetroot plants, though they haven't done so much damage, and I'm not surprised as I prefer to eat beetroot rather than eating the roots of the chard plant. I've had the same issues with carrots, with substantial damage being done to the crop without me noticing. This is also partially due to the closed canopy formed by the multiple rows of plants in the bed, and with lots of open space underneath the leaves for easy access by these creatures. But the fine mesh that I cover all of the carrot crops with to prevent carrot fly damage also helps to obscure the view, and in a few cases I only notice the extent of the damage when I remove the cover to harvest my prized vegetables. As with beetroot, a fair amount of damage can be done in a relatively short space of time, as the rats seem to go through the bed eating a bit from the exposed top of each root. This makes a lot of the crop unsuitable for passing on to other people, but the damaged part can often be cut off and the rest of the root is salvageable for those of us who are willing to do the work and are not too squeamish about having part of the crop chewed by another creature at some point in the past. While I have lost quite a few high-value early carrots this way, the damage to the main crop of carrots that I grow for storage can be even worse. The longer the roots are in the ground, the more damage can be done, and I've found roots that were eating down quite far below the surface of the soil. I used to keep these carrots in the soil for longer over winter and only harvested them as I needed them, as I found that they kept much better quality in the soil. But now I'm more inclined to harvest all the carrots in the autumn so that I can enjoy more of them rather than having to share them with the rats. It makes sense to me that rats will eat seeds, though I didn't expect them to enjoy roots so much, but it is their preference for tomatoes that really surprises me. Finding partially ripe tomatoes on the vine with large sections already eaten was a first obvious sign, and my wildlife camera came in handy to determine that it was in fact rats doing the damage. They would happily munch away at the lower hanging fruit, but I also found that they were quite content to climb the vines and eat the tomatoes that were much higher up in the plant. But with the smaller cherry tomatoes, it seems that they were taking down the tiny fruit one at a time to eat under the cover of other plants in the polytunnel before going back for another. I found patches of fragments of tomato skins when I cleared some of the adjacent plants, and a few months later had a flush of tomato seedlings to weed out that had been sprouted from all the seeds that were left behind. I haven't noticed the same level of rat damage to any of the other fruiting crops, but I suspect that they have sampled a few peppers in the polytunnel. And a few years ago I did find the squash with a lot of flesh hollowed out and all the seeds missing, but thankfully that hasn't happened again since. It seems to take a while for the rats to discover that the plants that I'm growing in the gardens are not only just edible, but perhaps preferable to the goodies they can find in the compost pile. There have been rats in and around the gardens and compost for years, but only fairly recently has there been lots of vegetables eaten in the gardens, and I wonder why that is. Part of this could simply be that the population of rats has been higher than in the past, because I wanted to see if the local cats, as well as the fox and owls and other birds of prey in the area, would do the job of keeping the numbers down to a reasonable level. This didn't work, and there ended up being a much higher population of rats because I hadn't kept up with the task of culling their numbers. And it seems that more rats means that some of them made nests farther away from the compost piles, and perhaps it was simply an issue of proximity, that the vegetables in the gardens were closer to their nests. I also suspect that it takes a while for them to realize how edible some of the things in the gardens could be, or to learn that they're available at certain times of the year. And once they learn something is good to eat, that knowledge is passed on to other rats, especially the next generation. I'd also like to think that the vegetables that I grow are just so delicious that they are a preferred treat, and I should see this as a compliment, but who knows. So, more recently, I've taken on the responsibility once again of getting the population levels of the rats down to a much lower level. And now that they know of all the good things to eat in my gardens, this has become a much more important task. When they were mainly eating things out of the compost, I was much more tolerant of a certain number being around, but now I feel like I need to eradicate them from the surrounding landscape. With rats being so common in the landscape around here, it's impossible to eliminate them entirely from the area around the gardens, as others will simply migrate in. But I at least want to get rid of the ones that have taken a preference to the vegetables that are growing in my gardens. I've tried many types of traps and different strategies for dealing with rats, including using dogs and digging out the nests, but I've had much more success recently with asphyxiating them in the nests and burrows. Once I find a nest, either in the compost or in the surrounding overgrown landscape, I try to locate and seal off the entrance except for one. Then I simply run my flame weeder torch into the remaining hole for a few minutes, filling the tunnels and nests with smoke and carbon dioxide and burning off all the oxygen, effectively suffocating any rats in place. Then I seal up the hole to keep the gases in and prevent any of the rats escaping. If I was in a different context or in a drier climate, I would probably use a different method. But in this situation, I have found this to be the most effective and easiest way to reduce the rat population in the area. It does mean that I need to be very observant of possible rat runs, and I regularly do the rounds to search for new burrows and likely places. But I've been able to significantly reduce their population levels over this past winter, and will keep a close eye out for additional nests as we head into the breeding season. This isn't something that I really want to do, as I'm quite content with them being in and around the compost or in the broader landscape. But when they start messing around with the vegetables in my gardens, things have gone too far, and I need to adopt a much more aggressive strategy of keeping their numbers as low as possible. Last week, I missed the opportunity to mention a milestone that we passed in this channel, as the video that I uploaded prior to this one was my 100th video on this YouTube channel. I'm really delighted with the positive response that I've gotten from all of the videos that I've uploaded to this channel. 100 videos is a lot, but there's so many more things that I want to try and explore, and so many other videos that I want to produce and upload to this channel. If you would like to support me in continuing this adventure, I have a Patreon page for regular contributions and a PayPal account for one-off donations. Any contributions that you could make would really help, and I especially want to thank all those patrons and other contributors who have supported this project in the past, as it has allowed me to get to this point, to get to the point of having 100 videos. But most importantly, I want to thank everyone for watching, and I hope that I can continue to make videos that you enjoy and find valuable.